Well, welcome back. We're looking again at A Body of Divinity by Thomas Watson, and we are talking today about Christ the mediator. Last time we looked at Christ as prophet, and this week then we look at Christ as the priest, and next week we'll look at Christ as king. And again, this is the threefold office, one office, of mediator. So Christ is mediator, and the three ways in which he is mediator, in which he carries out that office of mediator, is he's our prophet, he's our priest, he's our king. So now let's focus on Christ the priest, and we got to start with a Q&A from the Catechism. How does Christ execute the office of a priest? The answer being in his once offering up of himself a sacrifice to satisfy divine justice and reconcile us to God, and making continual intercession for us. So you see, you hear in that answer two things: satisfaction and intercession. And those are the two things that Watson focuses on. He starts with satisfaction. That's where we'll start. But I think his emphasis in this section is intercession, which is the work that Christ is doing right now as priest. And I think it's probably fair to say it's the aspect of his priestly ministry that is often ignored. We talk a lot about he satisfied justice on the cross. He satisfied the penalty for our sin. He lived a perfect life for us. We talk about that, but do we talk much about his intercession, his intercessory work at the right hand of God the Father for us that he's currently doing right now? Do we talk much about that? Well, probably not. So let's start with satisfaction. First, active obedience. He fulfilled all righteousness. His holy life was a perfect commentary upon the law of God, and he obeyed the law for us. So active obedience, right? It's not just a fancy term to remember, but it's a good way of remembering what Christ has done for us. Yes, of course, he died on the cross for us, and in dying on the cross, he absorbs our penalty. He receives that. He pays our debt. Absolutely. But we shouldn't forget this part, the active obedience of Christ, meaning that the first Adam, he was supposed to fulfill God's commands, follow God's law perfectly, perpetually. You remember that? We've talked about that already. Perfectly, perpetually, right? But he failed. Jesus, in his earthly ministry, he's the better Adam. He perfectly, perpetually, right, faithfully keeps the law of God without any fault whatsoever. He succeeds where Adam failed. He's the better Adam. That's Jesus. Now, what about the passive obedience? This is, I think, the one that we probably talk a lot more about, which is this. Our guilt being transferred and imputed to him, he suffered the penalty which was due to us. Now, Watson asks an interesting question. He asks this question. He says, how could Christ suffer being God? If he's God, how can he suffer, right? And a lot of times the answer, and Watson agrees with this, is, well, Christ suffered only in his human nature. But then the response to that would be, well, if he only suffered in his humanity, then how could that kind of suffering satisfy for sin? Okay? So you understand the problem. If he only suffered in his humanity, then how is that any different from any Joe Schmo going through suffering? And part of the answer to that Watson gives is he says, the human nature being united to the divine, the human nature suffered, the divine satisfied. And really, part of what he's saying here is there's something absolutely unique in the person of Jesus Christ. There's something absolutely unique in who he is as both human nature and divine nature united. Okay? Joe Schmo is not human nature and divine nature united. Okay, in the hypostatic union. That's not Joe Schmo. But Jesus is a unique person. And while, yes, we can properly talk about his, the human nature is what felt the nails, okay, is what endured the suffering of that physical pain on the cross. And yet at the same time, we don't want to so divide human nature from divine nature improperly. Right? We don't want to so divide them in an improper way because they're united. So we can speak about Christ as both human and divine, and yeah, we can also talk about human nature and divine nature. So this is part of the mystery of the hypostatic union, part of the mystery of the human and divine union in the one person of Jesus Christ. So probably didn't resolve all of those questions for you, but I don't think Watson does either. But he gets at some of it, and hopefully we did too. So what about the use of this satisfaction doctrine? Okay, that he actively obeyed all of the law for us, and that he passively took the debt, the penalty due to us because we are fallen creatures in Adam, right? Connected to his original sin and sinners ourselves. What's the use of this? Well, 7 uses. I'm just going to run through them. We'll get off to go off to a different topic here, but running through them quickly. See the horrid nature of our sin. See God's mercy and justice displayed. See the affection of Christ to us. See the excellence of his sacrifice, perfect, meritorious, beneficial. Let us apply this blood by faith and love. Number 6, be comforted in cases of guilt and in cases of pollution. And lastly, bless God for this precious sacrifice. Several things that we could focus on, but for the sake of time, I'll let you do that yourself. Let's move on to intercession, which is where I think Watson is really trying to focus much more on intercession than he did on satisfaction. Not that intercession is more important, but I think Watson, even in Watson's day, I think that intercession was probably neglected as well. So here's what he says on page 178. For whom did Christ intercede? Not for all promiscuously, but for the elect. Looking at John 17, the high priestly prayer, where he prays not for the world, but for his church. The efficacy of Christ's prayer reaches no further than the efficacy of his blood, but his blood was shed only for the elect. Therefore, his prayers reach them only. The high priest went into the sanctuary with the names of the 12 tribes only upon his breast. All right, so first off, what's intercession? Big word, what does it mean? Simply, to intercede is to make a request on behalf of another. To intercede, it's to make a request on behalf of another. So Watson talks about here an important part of Reformed theology, and he would argue an important part of biblical theology and Christology, the doctrine of Christ. For whom did Christ intercede? Well, Watson's going to say, well, Christ didn't fail in his intercession. Christ does not pray in this way. Remember, he prays for Peter in this way, but he doesn't pray for Judas in this way. For whom does he intercede? Well, Christ intercedes for the elect only, for his beloved people, right? All those, thinking of John 6, all those that the Father give to the Son will come to the Son. And those coming to the Son, Christ will not cast out. He'll lose none of them, but rather he'll raise them up on the last day. No one can come to the Son lest the Father who sent him draws them. So here Watson is saying Christ's intercession is for the elect. It's for his beloved people. Christ does not fail in his intercession, but is efficacious. It's powerful. It accomplishes the purpose, for which it is sent. And this is connected then, he says, to the efficacy of Christ's satisfactory blood spilled on the cross. All right, his blood was shed only for the elect. Therefore, his prayers reach them only. And then Watson connects this to the Old Testament priesthood, which prefigures and foreshadows the priestly work of Christ, including his intercessory prayers on behalf of his elect people. And he says the high priest went into the sanctuary with the names of the 12 tribes only. He didn't go in there with the names of the foreign nations, right? He went in with the 12 tribes only. Now you might say, well, that was the old covenant. What about the new covenant? Well, why do you think Jesus picked 12 apostles? Why is it that in Revelation, a new covenant book as far as I know, why is it talking about the 12 tribes? Why is it talking about the 12 thrones? Why is it speaking in this way? Well, there's a huge continuity between the Old Covenant and the New Covenant. Why does Paul speak of the Israel of God in Galatians, speaking of the Gentiles being part of true Israel as well? Right? The reason being is that Israel is actually a much broader group of people than only ethnic Israelites. And of course, not all ethnic Israel, right? All Israelites by blood, Romans 9 through 11, you can read about that. Not all of them are true Israel, right? And lots of Gentiles are grafted into Israel in that way. Again, Romans 9 through 11 is helpful for that. So Christ's intercessory work, his interceding on behalf of another, is efficacious, is powerful, it accomplishes its goal, and it is for, therefore, it is for only the church, only his beloved people. Okay. Now, what is Christ's intercession? He says, number one, Christ presents the merit of his blood to his Father. So the basis of his intercession is his satisfaction. I have accomplished satisfaction. And on that merit, on that basis, he comes to the Father in his intercessory work. Number two, in his intercession at the right hand of God the Father, he answers all bills of indictment brought against the elect. All right. So all accusations, all problems, all sins, right? It's all answered by the blood of Christ through his intercessory work, where he speaks and he intercedes on behalf of his church on the basis of his blood spilled for them, his resurrection. Number three, calls for acquittance. So acquittal. Lord, he says, let the sinners be absolved from guilt. And in this sense, he is called an advocate. Christ is our advocate. And when we think of that, Christ being our advocate, we need to think of his intercession for us at the right hand of God right now, where he is interceding for us. He's advocating for his church, again, on the basis of his satisfactory work, his active and passive obedience. What's the fruits of his intercession? 7 that we'll run through. First, justification. All right, so his intercession. Now you might be wondering, well, wait a second. I thought he was raised for our justification, his resurrection. I thought that was on the basis of his satisfaction. Well, yes, that's true. That's true. But lots of theologians throughout the ages, not just recently, but throughout the ages, have talked about our final justification. This doesn't mean that our justification now is a totally different justification from our justification then. Our justification then is on the basis of our justification now, right? Or in some ways, it's not even a different justification. It's just the consummation of this one, okay? The confirmation of it. So at the end, that final justification, we will be able to say that that's also because, yes, the satisfaction, but also the intercessory work of Christ. Number two, the unction of the Spirit, whereby we are transformed, made holy as God is holy. Number three, purification of our holy things. Number four, access with boldness unto the throne of grace. Number five, sending the Comforter. Number six, perseverance in grace. Number seven, absolution at the day of judgment. So number three, purification of holy things. You said, well, what holy things are you talking about? Well, think about our worship service. These sorts of, by what means is our worship service pleasing to God? Because we're still sinful. We still sin. So don't we ruin our performing of the sacrament of communion? Doesn't the preacher ruin their preaching by the fact that they're sinners? Well, part of the reason that we can say, no, those things are purified. They're purified, we talk about in the blood of Christ. They're also purified. They're brought before God as a pleasing aroma. Why? Because they're brought through the intercessory work of Jesus right now. Right? They're brought through his intercessory work, which again is on the basis of his blood, of his satisfaction. But it's important. It's a very significant part of that. Which goes right along with access with boldness to the throne of grace, right? Because we have an advocate with the Father right here, right now. Number five, sending the Comforter. So the reason we have the Holy Spirit and the unction, the power of the Holy Spirit, the reason we have the Holy Spirit is, remember, Christ had to ascend to the right hand of God the Father and engage his intercessory work before he would send on the day of Pentecost the Holy Spirit. Right? So it's from his place as the priest who's interceding for us at the right hand of God the Father. It's from that place that the Spirit is sent forth on the church. All right. The reason we persevere in grace, right? Our perseverance in grace is connected, mysteriously, I'll grant it, but is connected to Christ and his interceding for us. Remember, again, John 6, I'm preaching through John right now, but John 6, he will lose none of all that the Father has given him, right? Christ is still about that work. He will lose none of us. Number seven, absolution at the day of judgment. Well, I want to just close out with one really, really, really great quote from this chapter. And I want to, again, commend the book to you. It's one thing to listen to me kind of chatter about it a little bit every week. It's another thing to spend prayerfully some time in the book yourself. And hopefully this will kind of whet your appetite to make you say, yeah, okay, I've been listening to some of these, but I'm going to go pick up the book. I'm going to, make this a study that I'll do over time slowly. But here, maybe this will excite you to read it. Here's this objection. Someone says this, oh, but I am afraid that Christ does not intercede for me. I am a sinner. But Watson responds, and for whom does Christ intercede? He made intercession for the transgressors, Isaiah 53:12. But then the objector says, but I am followed with sad temptations. But Watson responds, but though Satan tempts, Christ prays. And Satan shall be vanquished. You may lose a single battle, but not the victory. Christ prays that thy faith fail not. Therefore, Christians, say, why art thou cast down, O my soul? It is a sovereign comfort that Christ makes intercession. We often don't think about the doctrine of intercession, but hopefully, even as I've given you a little bit from Watson on intercession, you're thinking, this is a far more important doctrine than I would have originally thought. Hopefully, you're comforted by it, encouraged maybe to pray more thoughtfully about how Christ is interceding for us. Hopefully, in times of dismay, times of hardship, you will not only think back to Christ's work on the cross. Of course, you should do that, right? His work on the cross and his resurrection, but also even currently, lifting your eyes, right? To the heavens, where Christ himself is seated at the right hand of God, interceding for you. Perhaps in times of dismay, in times of hardship, you'll lift your eyes to Christ and meditate and give thanks to God for the priestly work of Christ, who's interceding for you, who every accusation, right, being brought against you, Christ is your advocate. He's answering them all. He's pleading with the Father. It is finished. Here is my work, right? I've covered their sin. Hopefully you'll consider some of these things and be encouraged and be comforted. And so there is Christ's priestly work. Next time, I believe we'll be looking at Christ the King. We'll see you then.